come here. So it's a matter of putting a jigsaw puzzle together, and Veronica does a great job of it. So thank you, Veronica.
Wants to join the technology committee.
Yes, anybody who is interested in learning,
Yeah,
we could use your help and brain power.
as I say, a few people have, unfortunately, the people that have expressed interest are here.
Right. So yeah, so any help and that's, I'm glad you reminded me, Lisa. So the technology committee actually you could be on that committee. It's a matter of even just bringing the equipment here. You don't necessarily have to know how to run the equipment, although Veronica could probably teach you how to do that. But we always need help to get the equipment here, to break it down, put it up, break it down, and then take it back to Purdue. So if you have an interest in that and helping out in that way, you could get volunteer hours for it, and Veronica has a sign-up sheet. Again, what's nice is the more people we get to sign up, maybe you do it once a month, once every 2 months. So it just would be nice to spread the wealth around, because you do have to get here probably about 5:30 is when I know Lisa starts usually trying to set up. So you would get here a little bit early to get a prime parking spot for sure. So if that should be a good thing. Okay, so I'm gonna give this over to Jeff so he can introduce our speaker. Thank you again for your patience and us trying to get this all together.
Appreciate it. So Bob Ammerman has enjoyed digging in the dirt since he was a little kid on his family farm. Yeah, so his dad taught him how to farm, and by the time he entered high school, just a young teenager, they had turned over all of the family yard to Bob to be able to take care of and shepherd and supervise all of that. So he learned to love iris from his grandmother, and while in Colorado, he began collecting and growing iris. When he and his wife lived in the St. Louis area, his collection increased to about 350 varieties. I'm impressed. He became an accredited judge in the American Iris Society and has been involved in the organization now for more than 50 years. So many years ago, he moved to New Albany to become associate minister at Eastside Christian Church. He began growing a wider variety of flowers, including daffodils, iris, daylilies, and many other plants. He enjoys sharing his yard with others, and many of us have enjoyed the spectacular blooms in Bob's yard. Bob enjoys taking photos of his plants and speaking as well as writing. So every year, the program committee at its August meeting kind of gets together ideas for programs for the coming year. And Bob, I think, must be the source of about half of those ideas every year. He's always got a feast of ideas to suggest to us because his interests are so wide ranging. He has been a professor of music, a pastor, a letter carrier, as well as a Sunnyside gardener since 2017. I think we're really in for a treat tonight. So we look forward to having you here speaking with us, Bob.
Thank you. They had me worried for a while if I was going to have to pantomime. This is a peony, this is an iris, and I was going to call on some of you to come and help act out some of our themes. Hopefully we can get this work. I've been used to working at my computer, and I just keep pushing each slot and go from there rather than having written notes. So we will try this out and see how it goes. Extending bloom in your garden. I don't know how many of you would really like the idea of starting from scratch every spring and having to buy enough flowers and plants to fill your whole garden that are only going to last for just 3 or 4 or 5 months, and then they're gone. Next year, you have to go and start all over from scratch again. Terrible. Some of us are old enough to remember you used to be able to buy bedding plants 12 to a pack, maybe 39 cents or maybe even 59 cents. Then they went to 9-pack to 8 and then to 6. And you could still find a few at 4, but they're maybe $2.49 or $3.49. But most of them now are going to 1 plant in a pot for $4.97 to $6.98. If I were to start totally from scratch every year and have to buy enough to fill the yard, I don't know about you, no one has given me their credit card to say, just go and just shop the way you want to. That'd be like a kid in a toy store say, here, go buy whatever you want. So we're going to think that point of view tonight. Um, there's I'm going to encourage you to think about a variety of perennials and different things that you can grow that we're thinking about having bloom through most of the season in the year. We can buy bedding plants for just a while, but can we come up with things that might go for all year? He's mentioned, my wife and I have both gone to Colorado to work, and that's where we met and were married a little over 56 years ago. And as he mentioned, when I was a kid, I would go and help my grandmother Ammerman weed her iris beds. And I started to learn to love iris as a little kid. Well, when I got to Colorado, I started collecting and building a collection of iris. And I grew almost nothing but iris. And that's where we got going. Then probably, some of you may remember if you've been on Grant Line Road, we're in front of where the old Kmart used to be, Sheila Gardner's Iris Gardens. If you've seen her yard, beautiful, beautiful. That's where in the preceding years now, I've gotten most of my plants from her. And it breaks my heart to drive by there now and see a Jiffy Auto Lube on her property. They tore down all of her magnolia dogwood trees and all those iris beds and built that. Like I say, we moved here to New Albany 40 years ago and had to start totally from scratch. We did have the luxury when we moved in, there was nothing in the whole backyard. I didn't have to work around things. There was nothing in the next door yard, nothing in the next door yard. Why? Because those three sets of families played baseball all through there. And I sure spoiled things when I came along and I dug up sods, made all these flower beds that spoiled the baseball, but it was nice to have it open. And then eventually it got really crowded. As I mentioned, when I had up to 350 varieties of iris when we lived in St. Louis, and I dug up starts of all those, had them packed with Excelsior, with holes for ventilation, and brought those boxes of plants. But we couldn't get into our home till the end of September. And I didn't know what to do. And I finally went to people and said, is there any possibility we could store these boxes in the corner of your garage till we get in? They said, no problem. Well, unbeknownst to me, they thought, oh, it's too hot in the garage. We're going to take them to the basement where it was dark and damp and they had no dehumidifier. And then when we got into the house at the end of September, of course, I had to start all in and get all the sod taken up. And so it was still quite some time before we could start planting. I got out those boxes. It was like soup. Almost everyone had brought it. I think out of the 350, I might have salvaged 15 or 20 rhizomes. And so right then and there, I thought, I think I'm going to change my garden thing. I'm not going to grow just iris that blooms once a year. I'm going to start developing a variety of different things. And so I want to show you what we've done. So I'm going to show you several plants and ideas you might incorporate into your own gardening. Now, I know there's many in here that probably ought to be up here giving this program. I think of Bonnie Cummings and how much she knows what a master gardener she is. How she plans so strategically all of her flower beds and all these things. She knows every botanical name. I'm just a farmer. I said I grew up on the farm, and I kind of compared myself to Bonnie and some of you when Charlie Brown and Schroeder were lying on the ground looking at the clouds. Schroeder said, "Oh, I see the outline of British Honduras, and there's the Taj Mahal." And Charlie kind of shivered and said, "Well, I was going to say a ducky." So people like Bonnie and others here truly are master gardeners. And I'll say this when we get into things, if you were to hire a professional landscaper come in, they'd say, "Oh, no, you don't want to do that. You don't want to put those two colors together. Get that color over here. Or you need a better focal point for something, or this is too busy, do this, whatever." And so I'm kind of unconventional those ways. The garden, I always say it's busy and crowded, and someone once came and they were very complimentary. I said, well, it looks like an English garden. I thought, well, that sounds better than busy and crowded, but they're still busy and crowded. Okay, I'm going to start early in the season. The first part, hellebores, also called the Lenten rose because they start blooming in Lent, which is in early February. There are so many different colors and varieties of hellebores. When I was first introduced to them years ago, all they had were those drab olive green colors. They were interesting because they were blooming that time of year, but they sure were not pretty. But hybridizers have been working and developing all these different colors. Oh, will mention one other thing. All the pictures I have tonight, except about 3, are from our yard. I didn't go to like the St. Louis Botanical Gardens or to the Biltmore Estate Reservoir, all their big gardens there, someplace else, because you would say, well, of course they could grow those. They've got all kinds of money. They could buy any kind of plant they wanted, or yeah, they could do that because look how many gardeners they have on their staff. I'm doing all this by myself. So I purposely have used just pictures from our yard to show they can be grown here and you can do it on your own. Here's some more colors of the hellebores. Some of them are double, some of them are simple. They are, as we know, if you're familiar with hellebores, the blossoms hang down. There are many hybridizers working to get taller species and the faces pointing upwards so you can see them better. Now, the upper picture, they normally are evergreen all winter long. You can see it's drowned and dry all around it. That's the way they would look all winter. If we get, like we do a few times, where it suddenly goes down to about 0, they will get cooked and look like this lower right. That's anytime people think I'm terrible, but if I hear it's going to be really, really cold, I pray, let's have about 6 to 8 inches so I can have a good cover to protect all the plants in the yard. If that had been under snow, they would still have been perfectly green next spring. You just cut off those dead leaves and you can see there's little green growth underneath and they'll come up and bloom. As I've often mentioned before, the best way to enjoy the blossoms is just cut them off, float them in a bowl, and you get to see what they really look like. They will set seed and drop seed and produce more. In time, you'll have a big clump. The first couple of years I had them, I thought, what are all these little weeds coming up under my hellebore? I dug them all out. And then the next year I realized, they're not weeds, they're little hellebores. So I took several and lined out in the vegetable garden, doesn't grow. And then for a couple of years, I was able to bring them in for door prizes. And they will kind of cross-pollinate, come up with some new color patterns that I hadn't had before. Next thing, a simple little thing, winter aconite. You can plant these bulbs under your shrubs, and they'll come up early in spring and give a bright cheer there. We think of crocuses, both snow crocus and the regular crocus. They always used to say, well, just scatter over your young. And I didn't know, but I had a postal patron over in Butyl that every spring, the front yard was full of these little snow crocus. And I thought, how wonderful. Well, I realized by the time they bloom and the foliage is through, that's over before you start mowing. So you're not going to damage it. I just got an order of daffodil bulbs and some crocus last week. So I've been out digging holes in our front yard. And so we'll have that to come up for us next year. Johnny jump ups. Now I like pansies, but if you try to grow pansies here, they'll do well till it gets hot and they don't hang on very well. Violas will last much longer. Well, these are little violas, Johnny jump ups. I got the original seed in Colorado about 1970. And they just keep reseeding every year. Some years they're this thick, other years they're just just a few here and there, but it's always a fun reminder when I used to live there and see that a bright spot in the morning. Primrose, another early spring plant. I had not grown those until just several years ago, but the bright colors, almost like primary colors, and they come up every spring. They will come back every spring, and the longer they're there, they'll just keep multiplying and getting a bigger clump. I did find out that they don't like fertilize. A couple of years, I thought, oh, I don't need to fertilize these, and about cooked, and they just didn't respond. If I leave them alone, they do just fine. Then we're moving on to hyacinths. For several years, I would go, Walmart had individual potted one bulb in a pot for $1. And I'd buy maybe half a dozen, take them home and put them in a big saucer on the kitchen table for a few days so we could enjoy the beauty as well as that wonderful fragrance, and then set them out in the yard, and they come up every year. Now, sadly, I was there this year. They're not $1 anymore. They're like, I think it was $2.99 for a little one, but that was a inexpensive way for me to build up a collection of those. Now, some of you remember I've given a program on wildflowers before. I grew up with parents that we always went mushroom hunting in the spring. As a little bitty kid, we learned which ones to pick or which ones not. And when it got later in the season, they weren't finding many. I started looking at all the wildflowers, and I've been fascinated with them. And we have a little woods on the farm up in one county that I've been taking wildflowers to and transplanting into their yard. And I think they make a nice, lovely addition to mix in other things. Have the bloodroot on the left, the wild Virginia bluebells. You can mix those in. I'm just going to go through and show several. The real cute little Dutchman's britches on the left are very sweet, the sweet rue anemone. Now, a lot of the wildflowers are what we call ephemerals. You've probably heard them referred to that. That means they come up, they grow, they bloom, and when they're through blooming, the plant dies. You don't see them the rest of the year. Several of them will have the foliage all season long, but that's the nice thing about some of these, they're only there temporarily, and then they're gone. And I misspelled celandine poppy. I don't think spell check knows wildflowers. So after I had it put onto a thumb drive, I thought, that's not spelled right. And but they didn't catch it. But the trillium, the purple phlox, these will keep their leaves all the Jacob's ladder on the top, the little sweet dwarf Iris cristata on the bottom, the wild geranium. In the last few years, I've seen the Jacob's ladder being sold in our nurseries. So you'll run across that quite often. The shooting star is a really unusual, interesting thing. On the right is the great white trillium with the large blossoms. And I didn't realize, I thought there was a pink variety, but when they get pollinated, eventually that blossom will turn pink. This is the same plant. And the drooping bellwort on the right. I have one bed that I just have a mixture of spring wildflowers in amongst the hostas and things there. But I think it's a nice way, because I know one of these days I'm not going to be able to walk all the way to the end of the woods looking for mushrooms and looking for wildflowers. This way I can walk out into my yard and still enjoy something that means a lot to me. Now we're moving into the season of the daffodils, kind of the harbinger of spring. There are so many different colors and styles of daffodils. Most of us, first of all, we think of the plain yellow daffodil that our grandparents grew, that's the sign of spring. But there's so many more things than that. Just showing you some of the things that we have growing. Each one is almost prettier than the other to see what they are. Like I said, I just got an order last week, so I'm hoping that they will be ready to bloom next spring. But the flower bed was bare in the winter. The daffodils are now starting to add some interest to it. Now, I'll put this in here right now that I encourage you to take some pictures of your beds early in the year when there's not much there. you can see where daffodils are already growing, where something else is. So you don't do like I used to. I wait till fall to set out new daffodil bulbs. And I think, well, this might be a good spot. Wham, dig into a clump of bulbs and chop them and destroy them. So if you take some pictures ahead of time, then you get out there in the fall, if there's a couple things that you know are landmarks, okay, there was something here, there was nothing here, you know right where to dig. Now, I said I grew iris, but I didn't say I stopped growing iris. I went to have a variety. So I still have several. One of the first ones this spring are what they call a standard dwarf bearded. They're like about 7 to 12 inches tall, bloom very early in the spring, and they have hybridized so many different colors of those. And the nice thing about it, they are starting to bloom with daffodils. So you're extending your iris season by having some of these early varieties rather than waiting until May, later May for the tall beardeds. And I think of spring with all the variety of things that we can have that are starting to grow and come on. Now you'll start looking and see these flowers I showed you a while ago, how better it looked with a few daffodils. That's the last time you'll see the soil till fall. It gets busy. Using natives or perennials, they have a color and filler. The white oxeye davy, I got that over at Farmington probably 38 years ago. And now when I do the bluebird trails up at Mount St. Francis, I look and think, those wild daisies are oxeye daisies that I bought the stump of 38 years ago. And I don't normally allow this many to grow because this was taken last spring when I broke my leg and could get out. Normally, I would probably thin out 3/4 of those. So it's just some here. So my wife had plenty of daisies. She could make daisy bouquets almost every day from this, but how they fill things in. Another thing that we don't often see a lot are columbine, and they will seed themselves and fill in just the subtle shades and colors that they can add to the flower beds. I never plant them. They will seed themselves, and I never know for sure what color I'm going to have because they will kind of cross-pollinate. And some year I may have a whole bunch of one color and none of the other, or I may have just a few plants, but it's interesting. The only thing we haven't been able to achieve with my wife and I both living in Colorado, while the wild blue and white columbine of the mountains is still one of our favorite flowers. And I very rarely have anything that looks like that in our garden. Now we're getting ready to start the garden season. If you're like I was on the farm, you just have this bare thing with grass or weeds around it, and it's out there. But I think, why have just a boring patch of dirt? Let's have some flowers around it. Partly because I have too many plants and I need a plant place where to grow. And then I think, well, I hate to use that. So iris. What I say about my grandmother, she had a row of iris on the west and north side of her garden, so I guess I'm carrying on her tradition. But the tall bearded iris then come on, and the colors and things that they have, so many new combinations of colors that they've come up with on iris that really is something to see. Well, then we move into another species of iris called Siberian. It would be shaped kind of like your Dutch iris, maybe kind of a flat blossom, that they're a nice thing to have in the landscape. I like them because once they're through, they have that long, thin foliage that will kind of sway in the summer breeze. It makes a nice vertical accent in your landscaping. And they keep coming up with new colors that we never thought were possible 25 years ago. Now, I shouldn't brag, but I'm going to say the picture on the right, the American Iris Society has a photo contest every year. And I entered, and the one on the right didn't win a big prize, but I hear it's going to be on next year, one page of next year's calendar. So I need to buy one of those calendars out there. Then we have another species of iris. The top right is a Louisiana iris. And it gets its name, honestly, that came from the swamps and bayous of Louisiana. and hybridizers have been able to get different ones of those plants, and they've worked, and now they have many different colors of blossoms in Louisiana iris. And I can grow some out in the soil, just in the bare ground. I have, this one is in a pot sitting in the edge of our fish pond. The lower one is another species called Japanese iris. It opens out flat. It was probably about 3 weeks after you're tall bearded. So you see, we started with standard dwarf bearded, went into the tall bearded for quite a while, into these others, into the Japanese. So don't say, well, I'm only going to have 3 weeks to bloom if I grow iris. No, I get at least 6, 8 weeks sometimes with that. So I like to just have a lot to look at when you look out there. Like I said, busy and crowded. And my motto, variety is the spice of life. And then when you get there, where do I want to look first? Do I want to look at this flower or look over there? There's always something to see. Now, something else we could do to add color and interest to our yard would be flowering trees, flowering shrubs that we missed. The one on the left came up. I grew up in an old farmhouse that was built in 1860, and out behind the old wood house stood that bridal wreath bush. I've not seen it anyplace else, but little tiny blossoms. And so 40 years ago, I went back and dug up a start and have that in our yard. The lower one is flowering quince. I didn't know what that was called for years because that was in my other grandmother's yard. She called it a cardinal bush, probably because it was red, and maybe the cardinals even built there. And it wasn't until they had tore down her home, and I went and found the start, and I dug up a start to break it here. So my cardinal bush really is a flowering quince. And probably 55, 60 years ago, which I had never seen, my mother aspired and had a magnolia tree in her yard, and that was her pride and joy. So, of course, I had to aspire to get one of those in our own garden. The fringe tree, and I didn't realize till after I got it that it is considered a native species. So that fits right in with Purdue's goals of the native species. Had a postal patron in Elwood Mutual that had one of these in her yard, and the fragrance was heavenly. I could smell that tree about 2 or 3 yards away before I got to her house. And just the shows they are just little light fringe blossoms. And one day I went by and she had this potted little plant. She said, I ordered a fringe tree for you. So it's now in our yard. And sadly, Mrs. Hawkins died about 2 years ago at 95. Her son is a retired from the Louisville Police Department. So every year I'll email him a picture and say, your mother's tree, Mrs. Hawkins' fringe tree, is giving us joy again this spring. Azaleas, they can add a nice pop of color. Now, once again, I said I'm not traditional. They would say never plant on the west side of the house, only planted here and there. I planted them and they grew and were beautiful till about, I was trying to think if it was 4 years ago, where in December the temperature dropped about 50 degrees overnight, went from about 40 down to 10 below zero. You probably lost a lot of your green evergreen bushes and things. That kill, that did a huge number on our azaleas. They're just now finally getting back and recovering from that time, but they had a nice splash of color. Now, I don't know how many of you have ever been over to Audubon Park to see their Dogwood Festival every April. And we have just moved here a couple of years. Someone said, you need to go to Audubon Park and see their Dogwood Festival. Well, all these homes have big, beautiful dogwood trees and have them lighted with spotlights. And it was so beautiful to drive through there. And many of them, the ladies would be out with these long, full antebellum gowns like a Southern belle, waving as you drive by. Well, I finally have gotten 4 dogwoods of my own. You know, haven't got my wife to be willing to get one of those to stand out and wave yet, but it's fun to have those in the yard. The cabbage rose, reason it's called a cabbage rose. We had a program on roses last time. the petals are so tight and so close together. They're not like your typical hybrid tea rose. And this came from our grandparents' yard, one of my grandmother's. And after the house was gone, this rose bush, probably about 4 feet tall, was by the yard gate, which the fence was still there. And so I thought, I've got to take a start of that and bring it to my yard. It must like southern Indiana or something, because you can see it's just rose. The only sad thing, it only blooms once a year, but the fragrance of that rose is so wonderful, such a spicy, pungent fragrance. Now, you can add other things to your landscaping to add interest. I mentioned we lived in St. Louis for 12 years, and we went down south of downtown, south of the Soulard district, if you've ever been out for the Soulard farmers market. And there's a place that was selling these old cobblestones from the old streets of South St. Louis. I bought several to use them to make a wall when we built a patio on our home. Sadly, I used the prettiest ones, and we were out 2 years ago. They're still there, set in concrete, but I was able to, enough that weren't in concrete, to bring with me. I also bought that section of wrought iron fence, and I put that up. You know, the nice thing about this, and the geos, which we have a lot here in southern Indiana, you don't have to water, you don't have to fertilize, you don't have to transplant or prune, but they just make nice additions to your landscaping. After my mother died, they had a farm auction, and I bought the old dinner bell, had that mounted there at the corner of our patio. The house was built in 1860. I imagine the barn not too long after, and the old pump was in the barn until my dad had water run from the new well to house out to the barn. I was able to get a hold of that old pump and once again install it by our patio. My grandfather farmed with horses in the 1930s and 1940s. And I found a fragment of one of the old wooden wheels that he had used in his years. So those, like I say, they don't add beauty for such, but they add interest and something for us to enjoy when we go out. The little lawn jockey was another postal patron in Butyl, a gentleman about 90. And when he passed away, I went by one day, and the family was taking out and discarding everything. I said, well, what are you going to do about the lawn jockey? I don't know. I said, would you ever sell it? Do you want it? Well, you can just have it. Well, I went to pick it up. It was out in the middle of the backyard. To carry it to the post truck, it is solid iron. It's almost like trying to pick up an elephant and drag it all that way. But it's a nice memory of the postal patron. You can also add a water interest, a small pond. Glenn is not here tonight. I was asking how Glenn pronounces his last name. I think it's Glenn Weiss. They used to have the pond store out at Palmyra, was it? Ramsey, okay. And if you ever were there, well, they opened that, had that store going, an old feed mill or elevator set up, all the ponds, all the plants, everything. And Glenn gave me ideas how to build a pond. I bought the liner things in there. He said, I hear all these people that they've got to dig a trench and run wiring and do all this. He said, if you have the right amount of plants and not too many fish, you don't need a filter, you don't need a pump, you don't need to have all this electric work, that they will survive fine. Well, that was 28 years ago, and it has worked out great. So you don't have to go out to one of those stores on Charlestown Road and spend 10 to 15,000 to have them come and plan and build a big pond with all the waterfalls and all this. If you had the time, you could build one of these yourself and add interest to your garden. Now we come to one of my next favorite, besides iris, times of the year, are peonies. And we know that they are called now the state flower of Indiana. People used to come up and say, I have my grandmother's peony and it's 100 years old. And I thought, sure thing, lady. We know that's not true. Well, was it 3 or 4 years ago, we had a program from Adelman's Peony Farm in Salem, Oregon. And I get their catalog every year. And some of the beautiful varieties that are still very popular today, you'll see if they were hybridized 1850, 1875. And so if you have your grandmother's peony and it's 100 years old, I believe you now. They add a lot of grace and beauty as well as fragrance to the yard because some of them are very fragrant. The first type of peony to bloom of the season is a tree peony. They have a woody stalk. It's hard to see. They don't die down. You don't cut them off. It's just like a wooden bush in the winter. And they bloom probably at least 3 weeks or more before your regular peonies come to bloom. And they have a lot of interesting different colors that they've come up with in the tree peonies and hybridizing even more all the time. So that adds a nice interest in the early garden. Herbaceous peonies, those are the ones that most of us are familiar with. They come up from scratchy spring, then we cut them off in the fall. They call that a herbaceous. The newer shades of color of coral are some of the newer colors that they've come up with in peonies, which I really love. But an interesting thing, the longer those blossoms are in bloom, they gradually start fading to a peach, to a very pale peach. So you get a variety of colors with one plant that way. So people question, this can't be a peony. Yes, they are actually colors of peonies. So, and then the next species of peony is the Ito or intersectional. There's a Japanese man by the name of Ito who crossed trees with herbaceous and came up with this new species. They have kind of a woody stalk, but we cut them down each fall. But they have a different shape of blossom, different leaves, and a lot of different colors, and they become a very popular thing. Now, I'm just going to show you a few things of some of our different peonies. We have probably 50 some different varieties with all the different colors and styles of blossoms. When most of us don't know, we think of peonies, well, that was Grandma's red, pink, and white. Those are the colors of peonies. Well, showing the new combinations, the new types of blossoms. The white one on the right, single, they call that a Japanese style of blossom. And some people hybridize just that type of blossom. Like I say, it's hard to go out in the yard and say, this is my favorite peony. Somebody used to say, what's your favorite flower? And I say, well, whatever's blooming today. So no wonder I love peonies. Then we come in the summer season, starting with daylilies. Some of those will bloom really early, some mid-season, some late in the season. Some are quite short, some are medium, and some are quite tall. So there's a variety even in daylilies. No more do we have to put up with those ubiquitous Stella d'Oro. These two pictures are not in our yard.
Yeah.
Or the bottom one or the roadside are just lilies. I will confess, I grew those for a while. I thought I've got to do my duty. Everybody's talking about Stella d'Oro. And after a while, I thought, okay, I've done my duty, out to go. And my grandparents lived back a long lane, and out at the county road at the end of their lane, there was a big clump of these ditch lilies, the roadside orange lilies. And I thought, Grandma, I need to take a start of these home to remember you. I did that along with her lily of the valley and their yucca plants, because they had yucca growing by the gate that went out to the chicken yard. Well, after 35 years, I said, Grandma, I don't know whether you hear me or not, but I've done my duty. I'm going to get rid of these because I didn't realize when you see these ditch lilies, why there's a big clump, they grow underground and just spread awful. It took me about 3 years to kill all those off. But instead of those, we have many beautiful varieties. If many of you have been over to Linda Luck, where she has 1,000 varieties of daylilies, to see her gardens. And I've been getting more. In fact, last week I went over and got another 18 daylilies from her to add variety. But all these beautiful color combinations, why settle for Stella d'Oro or orange lilies when you can have all these beautiful things? And the nice thing, I said some bloom early or middle or late. Many now are blooming, reblooming throughout the summer. When I went over to pick up my daylily order from Linda last week, she had some in her garden blooming right now. That's extending your bloom if you grow something like that. So all these different pretty things. And you can mix them in with other things. Of course, you would expect me to say that by now, when I said I crowd everything together, but it's nice rather than, I have a section of just daylilies, but I like to mix them in with other perennials and things growing there to add color. Summer phlox, the tall phlox is another thing that I've enjoyed. They come in several different shades. The bees love them. I can go out, if there are a bunch of bloom, I can count 15 bumblebees at one time on these different clusters of the phlox. But they're also fragrant. I could be walking past and I smell this fragrance, realize, oh, that's the phlox that I am smelling. Then we come into summer to the Asiatic lilies. Now, if you think back when I was in spring, I didn't show any tulips, did I? I tried tulips, but you either got to do something to keep the moles from getting to them or the squirrels that did eat in the bulbs. And most of the tulips now are almost considered an annual. They don't keep producing year after year. And one year I was over at Jewish Hospital and they were digging out their tulips in the season. I said, what are you doing? Well, I said, are you going to throw them away? Do you mind if I take them? Sure. Well, I planted them. I had 2 or 3 blooms the next year and nothing. So, but I had a postal patron in Louisville that had a built flower bed up on her porch. She stepped on concrete and here was this, and it had a long full row of red tulips. I said, where did you get these? I've never seen tulips come back. She said, I was a grade school teacher years ago and a student brought me a pot of tulips and I planted them as they multiply. I keep spreading and now it's a whole row. I thought, I wish I knew what that variety was. But with your Asiatic lilies, you don't have to replant those every year. You buy one bulb and it keeps multiplying and you end up with a great big cluster of blossoms and how bright cherry it is. Magic lilies. Some call them surprise lilies, resurrection lilies. I've even heard them called naked ladies because there's no foliage. And summer amaryllis. They grow in the spring like daffodils, and then the foliage dies down. And then in July sometime, all of a sudden you see these little buds starting to come up, and you get this cluster of beautiful pink blossoms. We had a neighbor that lived to be 100 that gave me bulbs probably 60 years ago. We had 4 big clumps on their yard. I was amazed in the last 2 years, I've seen catalogs have these listed at $16 to $19 per bulb. I had, what? They've been around that long and you're doing, I thought, I've got a gold mine out in my yard. But they're a nice thing to add thing in summer. Then we get into the oriental lilies, stargazers, I think, are a favorite of many people. I work part-time with the Bill and Seabrook Funeral Home, helping with their visitation. And occasionally there will be bouquets where they mix the stargazers in with everything, and they're just so beautiful. Then we get into the oriental lilies, and I said stargazer would be in that category. And oftentimes you will smell them before you discover where it is, because that fragrance just wafts through the yard. Old-fashioned tiger lilies. Once again, thankful to my grandparents. When I went back, the house was gone, but behind a bush out in the backyard, here were a clump of tiger lilies. Well, you know me, I've got to get the shovel and dig a start. And so for years now, I've had a start of their tiger lilies grow and bloom in our yard every summer. When we lived in Colorado, a lot of people had cabins or things up in the foothills, the mountains, and they grew so many beautiful delphinium in their beds. And so I found that I can buy seedlings and they will come back for 2 or 3, 4 years and rebloom for me, but they add that nice vertical interest and there's several different colors of those. Now, of course, we talk about natives and perennials. Your orange butterfly weed, your purple coneflower, black-eyed Susans, other things. They add splashes of color. And that's probably why somebody said it looks like an English garden, because the mixture of colors that way. But they really do attract different butterflies and bees and things, and adds a lot of interest. And with the Monarda or bee balm, these things will gradually fill in your flower beds. That empty flower bed you saw was a few daffodils. See how it is in the summer with all these other things growing. Now, another thing that you might try are hostas. Uh, if you've ever studied, you know, some hostas may be just about 10 to 12 inches, the whole plant, and some might be 3 to 4 feet, a huge mound. All different color patterns and things. A few years ago, we went to an spring iris meeting up at Lafayette, and they had tours of homes, and this one home had 100 different varieties of hostas in their yard, all different sizes, all different colors, different shapes, and twisted leaves and things. Very interesting. Well, by that same old wood house in my folks' homestead, at the corner back behind that was this bright blue hosta. It's not very interesting if you look at the leaf, it's just a plain green leaf, but it puts out the prettiest display of blossoms of almost any hosta I've ever seen. So I get a double bonus. I like it because it's pretty and know it has that home connection there. Variegated Solomon seal. This makes an interesting color contrast of greens. It doesn't have a blossom that you notice, but in the garden, I also every once in a while might like to cut off a stalk or two to use in an arrangement, but cautious. It is very invasive. Those roots grow underground almost like an iris over them and they start spreading. But I love the contrast. So I'm resigned every year. I get out my shovel and I'm digging out half the clump so it doesn't take over, just to enjoy that colorful contrast. Many of us are familiar with coral bells, the little tiny red blossoms with the green leaves. Well, they've come up with new varieties with the different colors of leaves. They still have tiny blossoms, and you grow these more for the foliage rather than the blossom, but have some of that scattered around your yard, and they many of them will basically keep some color all winter and as a nice contrast in your flower beds. Now, when I first started talking about buying plants, I didn't aim to give the impression I don't buy any bedding plants anymore. I just couldn't afford to fill my whole yard full. I still love to get bedding plants. I like in the bottom left picture, the tall red salvia, how it attracts hummingbirds and butterflies, mix in other bedding plants. The last few years I've been growing more, just go buy a coleus and let it just fill with a bunch of bright color. And it's a very simple thing to add to your flower beds. We had a program on roses not too long ago, but if you've ever grown roses, you know they are very labor intensive. You've got to continually be pruning and spraying and doing all these things. My mother, as a farm wife, loved roses, and she had a big rose bed. In fact, she tested roses for Jackson Perkins. They'd send her 4 roses every year, and she kept records on how they grew, whether they were disease resistant, what the blossoms were like, everything. And at the end of the year, she'd send a report. And if they would ever introduce that in the future year, you could submit a name, say, I want to call this Rosie Dozy or whatever. If they liked your name and introduced it, they'd give you a prize. My mother started the rose on the left probably 45 years ago. She would stick a rose, a stalk under a ball canning jar. That was back before they were collectible, and leave it over there all winter long. She'd do it in the fall. Well, we lived in St. Louis and became very close to 2 retired school teacher sisters that had a wonderful garden. And they said, if you take the very first bloom of the season in May and put that under a jar, you will have bloom on that rose by fall. I don't use a jar. I take a milk jug and cut the bottom out and put that over. And then if I want to gradually get it used to the air, I'll take the lid off and pull. And sure enough, the rose on the right, the one that I was started that way, it does work. Now on the left are amaryllis lilies. And if you're going to be like me, you're going to say, now wait a minute, those are house plants. We're talking about your yard. I think most of us love the beauty. They're normally at Christmas time, but we have so many Christmas decorations that I wait to bring my bulbs out to the end of January after I've gotten the Christmas stuff put away, and then they'll bloom the end of February into March. Well, I had poster papers out in the Newburgh area of Louisville, that had a small red amaryllis growing in their flower beds year after year. They never dug it up. The ones on the right, this picture is not in our yard, but I took this in June. We have a couple in church. He turned 95 in April. She turned 94 in May. They planted amaryllis bulbs on the west side of their garage, which is a brick building, and they just keep multiplying. They just keep lining up. They have a whole row of these beautiful amaryllis that they never dig up. Makes me want to get a brick garage with a flower bed on the west side. But it shows that something we might do to extend our bloom season from different. Something simple like a zinnia. We have put out our elder neighbors behind us so they couldn't garden, so we put it out for them. And then when they passed away, the next door neighbors bought the house for their kids. I said, "You've always planted the garden. Go ahead." But she said, "Could you plant me some flowers so I could cut a bouquet?" So I went and bought some zinnia seeds. Now, every year for the last several years in fall, I'll go cut off dried seed heads and save them. And then in the spring, this year, on the two sides of a large L-shaped bed, I just kind of crumbled up and scattered them along after I worked up the soil. Had no idea what I was planting, whether they were all going to be pink or all be yellow. But I went out the other day and we probably have 15 different colors or shades or styles of blossoms from those. And if you could see the number of butterflies and hummingbirds that visit these zinnias, just a simple little thing of saved seed that adds a lot of color through the summer and up till the fall, so they get killed the freeze. Now, I mentioned I liked iris. You know, there's iris that repeat bloom, that bloom again in the fall. There are hybridizers that all they're working on are to produce more colors, more different shaped blossoms and patterns in fall or reblooming iris. They want you to get a prettier blossom, more blossoms to a bloom stalk, make it look more like a show stalk. The one on the right was in November last year. There were 6 bloom stalks from that clump. And I finally, when the first freeze, it didn't get them, when I found I was going to get down to between 15 and 20, I went out, cut the last ones off and took them in for a bouquet. So see, iris are not just limited to back home. It was Decoration Day. That was the flower we'd cut to take to the cemetery. So that's another way you can extend the bloom of the season. Now, I mentioned crocus a long time ago. We think of them as spring, but you didn't know there are fall blooming crocus are called colchicum. And there's many differences. This particular style of blossom is called a water lily style of fall crocus because it looks quite a bit like if you've seen the water lily blossom. They come up in the spring and almost look like it's corn growing, this foliage. And then that dies down in the summer. And in the fall, ours started blooming about a week and a half ago. Just all of a sudden, this little bud starts coming up. So it's kind of like your magic lilies that grow in the spring, then the blossom comes later. The only place I've ever seen these bulbs listed was in the catalog McClure and Zimmerman. The last couple of years now, it's called Jungs or Youngs, however they say it. I'm not sure whether they were bought out, but on the left, you'll see a column of 10 different styles or colors, shapes of blossoms of fall blooming crocus. So we can extend from early March up into October by having crocus that way. Sedum or stonecrop or live forever. Interesting waxy foliage in the summer, then they get either a light pink or a deep rosy blossom blooming now. If you let them go in the winter, they'll dry and have that interesting landscape feature in your garden over the winter. Now, I'm on the bluebird team, so I guess I need to include this, but this doesn't include growing, but I encourage everybody to maybe put a nesting box or have a bird feeder in your yard. Ours is outside our kitchen window. We could sit there eating lunch and see the birds at our feeder. We don't have bluebirds in our yard because we don't have meadows near us. We're right in the middle of town, but we'll have chickadees, sometimes the little house wrens with their lovely song. But we'll have probably 15 to 20 different species of birds that will visit our feeder every year. And every once in a while, they'll drop a sunflower seed. And it comes up by the bird feeder, the black thistle feed bag, maybe 7 or 8 feet tall. And they get to add beauty, and then we get to watch the birds feast on the sunflowers on that. So I encourage you to try that. We're getting almost done with the year, and the fall color is along. Dogwood trees normally will turn a lovely red. I'm not sure, ours are not showing much color this year. I think it's so dry that we may not get much. But about 37 years ago, I went to the McCullough Mansion at the west end of 131 or Lewis and Clark on the side, south side that they made into a restaurant event center now. There was a little seedling of a maple tree because there used to be a huge, beautiful maple tree that they'd cut down. But I dug that little seedling up, planted a yard, and now we have this beautiful, it stands out in the neighborhood because of the bright color it has there. So you can extend color that way. Then we come to the winter. Snow, everything's at rest. But if you have a holly bush with some holly berries, the snow and ice adds beauty yet to your yard, even in that time of year. And at Christmas, you can have some fun and put a few lights, a few floodlights, and enjoy that way. Now, I'm going to just go through just a couple of minutes, mention some things here. Some of you are going to say, you said if you had to buy all those plants every spring, that would be a cost a fortune. Well, you've been showing me tonight, if I had all that, that would really break the bank.
Yeah.
Well, I want to let you know how this has come about. I'll tell this side story. We had a neighbor a few years ago that she married our neighbor. She was a wonderful gardener, but a year or so later, she came down with ALS disease. And the next spring, I thought, she doesn't have any flowers growing in her flower beds. Well, and then I thought, duh, she's not physically able to do it. So I said, would you like for me to plant flowers? And she was thrilled with that. She said, buy whatever you want and I'll pay for it. And she thrilled. Well, the next spring was getting ready to start. She said, could you make me a perennial bed like you have? And I said, kind of smiled, and we both laughed later. I said, you want me to do in 3 weeks what it took me 30 years? And she kind of smiled, yes, I know. But I made this one bed that was almost this size, full of everything I could, bright colors. The last thing she wanted to look at before she went to the hospital the last time and died 10 days later. So we can do things like this to bring joy to others. But I just wanted to tell you that to realize you're not going to produce my yard in 3 weeks or 3 months and maybe even 2 years. This has been a process that I've been developing all this. I often wish when I was younger, if you'd been over to Linda Luck's, have a yard, not quite that big, but where I could have an orchard, I could have a big garden, have all these things. But I'm getting to the age I realize our 1/4 acre lot with a house and patio and driveway is almost more than I'm going to be able to take care of much longer. But we do what we can. Now, where do you find all these plants? Maybe you have friends or relatives or neighbors. Maybe they're family heirlooms. I've been mentioning, I got this from a grandmother's yard. You may have friends that have extra things that said, I don't know what to do with all these iris. Do you want any? Well, sure, and you can get things. Second, every once in a while, our Master's Garden group will have plant sales. You can buy interesting varieties of flowers for not too much and add. Garden centers. You're going to have to pay money, but it's for a long-term investment. You're not buying it just for 1 year. And if you go at the end of the season where they have clearance sales, sometimes you can find some great things that are big bargains. Sometimes they don't look quite as fresh as at the beginning of the year, but with a little TLC, they will grow and thrive just fine. Yard sales. Wallace's Nursery over in Heights Lane, the first Saturday every August allows the Iris Society, the Daylilies Society, the Daffodil Society, and the Hospice Society all come in and set up tables to sell plants or bulbs. And they don't consider it competition, but it gives each of these societies a chance. And you could go and buy some very nice, lovely name brand things for pennies on the dollar, what it would cost. When I mentioned about growing iris, used to the gardens like Shriners in Oregon, different things. The first year they would introduce a new variety. If back 50 years ago, it might be $7.50 or $10. And that, to me, was like saying $1 million for one of those. Well, nowadays they're anywhere from $65 to $75 the first year's on the market till they multiply enough to bring the prices down. But here's things. Every once in a while, we'll have plants. I think there's plants here tonight, door prizes at our Master Gardener meeting. And sometimes you can get something you've never had before. Try that. Catalogs. They cost money, but they're dream material. If you've ever gotten this beautiful catalog, oh my, that's pretty. I'll warn you, if you ever buy one thing, you'll be on everybody's mailing list. But you don't have to spend anything just because they send you a catalog. But you can have a lot of dream material there to see what types of things that are there. Country roadsides and woodlands. You'd be surprised the butterfly weed. A lot of these things are just outgrowing in the country. I have family and I have friends that have woods that said, come and you find wildflowers that you want, help yourself. So you might find people who will give you access without spending anything to get those things. Bartering or plant soft. I'll trade you 3 iris for one of those daylilies, or I'll prune your bushes by your front door if you give me a start of your hosta. And a lot of times people are glad to barter that way. That's the old fashioned way of life. And that's one way you can gain some things. Like I mentioned about my iris, sell some of yours. When we were in Colorado, I just pinned a price list on the clothesline because I wasn't there during the day. I sold plants for 25 or 30 cents a rhizome. If you're really special, maybe 50 cents. Well, we moved to St. Louis. Well, that was later, went up 50 cents. If you're really special, maybe $1. I wasn't in business to supplement our income. I was earning some money. So when the iris catalog came on, I could buy this one and this one and this one. And so you might have extra. I've been in our neighborhood in different places where people will have plants at their garage sales. They have too many hostas or too many of this. And you might be able to sell something to get some money to buy something else. Experiment. Just because it looks pretty in a catalog doesn't mean it's going to grow in your yard. You may have too much sun or not enough sun. It may be too wet or your soil is such. I try things. You may try something and say, this was beautiful in the catalog, but it looks like a dog. I'm not going to keep that anymore. You'll find out what you like best, what grows best for you. So don't feel guilty. We have several things that I've grown through the years that I don't have any longer. I just chose not to use the space for them. And last, take photos. I probably have, in all categories of family, everything, probably at least 5,000 digital photos on our computer. It took me hours and hours to go through to find all these photos to accomplish this. But you can remember your flowers at the end of the season. And also, I'm starting to realize when I can't get out and do that physical work anymore, I'll be able to garden from my computer. And I'll grow peonies or daffodils or something while I'm sitting there. So I encourage you to do that. Just one little list here. I didn't list and show everything we have grown in our garden. I just mentioned some of these clematis vines, a bleeding heart, the flowering almond bush, calendulas, chives, petunias, sunflowers, geraniums, snapdragons, marigolds, chrysanthemums, poppies, asters, yarrow, allium, the pots that we have on our front porch or patio, raspberries, hardy gladiolas, pansies and violas, many different bedding plants, Mexican sunflower. I got the seed from Ray for that to grow those for a while. Globe amaranth, coxcomb, grape hyacinth, all kinds of things that I didn't show you. And many of you may try things that I have not shown or mentioned, things such as a forsythia, hydrangea, wagelia, crepe myrtle, spirea bush, hibiscus, red twig dogwood, hollyhocks, crabapple trees, flaming flowering peach or weeping cherry, fruit trees, burning bush, which is invasive. No, no, no. Rose trellises, cannas, dahlias, having banana trees or palms. You may like the effort with tulips, creeping phlox, blueberries, yucca, lily of the valley, ferns, on and on. You may have a variety much more than I have here. Like I say, some of you probably should have been up here giving this program with your knowledge and the things that you grow. So the last picture here, it's your yard. If you want nothing more than a couple geraniums in a pot on your patio, don't let anybody guilt you and say, well, you need to be growing this and this and this. But if you want to plant your whole yard full of flowers, don't let anybody guilt you and say, that's too busy, that's too crowded, that's too much work. You don't need that. You only need this. It's your yard. Decide what you like to do. Have fun with it. Don't let it be drudgery. If I could get out a few minutes each day and weed a little bit, and then next day weed some more, which I'm in the process of doing now, it's not as bad as think I've got to go do this whole thing. But have fun with it, and hopefully you'll be able to enjoy your garden all year long. Thank you.
Anybody have questions for Bob? Lisa?
There was just a comment on Zoom that, Myra wants to be your neighbor.
Yeah.
And there's, both Angela and Judy both say great presentation on Zoom.
Well, thank you. It was a lot of fun to go back to all these photos, remember all the years, and try to pick out ones that would picture the different varieties of peonies or iris and things. So it was enjoyable for me to be able to relive a lot of the gardening that way.
Speaking of sharing, Linda Best actually brought some irises today. So they're over here at this table. She has pictures of what colors they are. So feel free to take what you want. She's been cleaning out her beds. So she brought some to share. So exactly what you were talking about, Bob. Real quick before we break, so everyone can go to the restroom if you need to. Mike is back there selling the cookbooks as well as memberships. Veronica has the list, the sign-up list to help bring equipment to and from for our meetings. What else do I have here? I think that's it for right now. So everybody, if you need to use the restroom, go ahead. We do not have snacks tonight. Margie normally would have that, but she lives on the Kentucky side. And she said it was gonna be hard for her to get here with flooding because of all the rain. So if you can, let's come back at 8 o'clock. Give you 10 minutes to use the restroom if you need to, and take a drink of water, whatever. Okay, see you at 8. Thank you.